Christianity and secularism are conflicting ideologies. Has secularism won? Join us as we talk to the author of the newly updated Christianity and Secularism, the second volume of Elgin Hushbeck's Consider Christianity series. Welcome to Into the Desert, exploring the wilderness of ideas. Don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons and become a fellow adventurer by supporting our channel's mission of encouraging discussion, not division, on Patreon. The link is in the description. Welcome, Elgin. Let's dive right into the questions. Considering that Christianity and secularism explores the controversies around religion, society, and Jesus Christ, why did you choose this topic for your book?
Well, the main reason is I grew up as an atheist. I was in my early 20s when I finally became a Christian. And I've always had an engineering scientific background, so I was looking around for books that would address the questions I had and the concerns I had, and I really didn't find a lot out there, at least along these lines. There are lots of books written to encourage Christians. There are lots of books that were written giving lots of little factoids, but there was no coherent presentation of the issues that I was concerned about. So I sat down, started writing. I'd never been an author before, and I started writing a book, and it was a very long process before I could finally finish and get it published, but eventually I did. And Consider Christianity is the result of that initial work.
Being that, you were an atheist that converted and you wrote this after your conversion, is your target audience atheisms? Is it for Christians? Who is your target audience?
Well, ultimately, any author will say their audience is everyone. But in particular, I'm writing this book for people like me, people who had questions, people who are willing to explore issues and look at the various pieces of information, pro and con. I'm looking for people that were addressing particular concerns that I had when I was an atheist, and I didn't see a whole lot out there. So my target audience is, I guess you might say, twofold. One would be Christians who their friends or family are asking them questions that they're not quite sure how to answer. And the other is the open-minded atheist, the person, obviously the hardcore fanatic is not going to pay any attention. But to someone who's interested in hearing, what does the other side have to say? What is the rational response, the thoughtful response to some of the criticisms that secularism has made against Christianity?
So you just released the new edition of Christianity and Secularism, which obviously was sparked by the releasing of all of your books into the audiobook version. But in the process, I know you made some changes and you had to update it. What were some of the biggest changes that you had to make?
Well, the biggest change has been, since I initially wrote the book, the conflict with secularism has gotten a lot more pronounced. When I first wrote the book, I actually had some early reviewers who complained I was exaggerating things. No, it turned out I wasn't. And a lot of the things I talked about in the book have since come to pass, and you see a lot more open hostility against Christians. So when I went to update this book, it was actually easy to find some new supporting information. So, for example, I have a study in there about one particular sociologist who was looking at bias against Christians, and he was a little surprised to find that there was actually more bias against Christians in his surveys than there was against other supposedly groups that face violence, like Muslims. He interviewed his colleagues at university level and found that, for example, most of them would not hire a fundamentalist or even an evangelical Christian because they just refused to hire those people. So in a lot of ways, it's become more pronounced. Of course, we've also seen a lot of court cases going up to Supreme Court where Christians are trying to, defend their ability to be in society. And luckily, the current court is supporting a lot of those those Christians and allowing them to practice their faith. But even the concept that they have to go to court to secure these, in one of the court cases, the Supreme Court chastised the lower governmental organization for its outright hostility towards Christianity. So in a lot of respects, it was much easier to, things I said I was seeing and people thought I was making it up. It's much easier now that they can see the actual evidence. It's actually come to fruition. And if anything, the tide is turning in our favor, in favor of Christianity.
Yeah. So, I mean, along those lines, we're talking Christianity and secularism, and they feel like opposing ideas. Like there's no similarities. So why do you have them both in your book? What do they have to do with each other, since they seem to be mutually exclusive?
Well, as a point I make in the book, there's a difference between secular and secularism. Being secular means to basically be separate. We have a secular government, for example, and there's no problem. In fact, I hardly endorse a secular government. I fully believe in the First Amendment. I talk a lot about the First Amendment in the book. But secular and secularism are really two different things. Secularism is a worldview. It's a belief that there is only the secularism, that there's only the material world, and that religion has no place in that world, including Christianity. And so it really is at war with Christianity. It wants to suppress Christianity wherever it is found. And you see this in the actions of, for example, government organizations. You see that, for example, during COVID, you had government saying, it's essential that we keep casinos and bars open, but we need to close churches because we can't have people gathering. Well, that would never have happened 50, 60 years ago. Nowadays, it was, of course, we close the churches, but we're going to keep the bars and we're going to keep the casinos open. That's an effect of secularism impacting the society and being anti-Christian.
So along those lines, I think part of the growing rise of secularism has come from the fact that people look at Christianity, and one of the biggest things people always think of is like the Catholic Church, which has dominated so much of our history. And there's some really icky stuff in that history. And it's not just the Catholic Church. I mean, you see it in the Church of Britain and some of the other Christian religions where they use their power to do horrible things to the people. And so there's been this aversion because, well, people have done bad things in the name of Christianity, therefore Christianity must be bad. And that's not necessarily the truth, but it's the impression everybody gets. And I know you talk a lot about this in your book. What is your take on it?
Well, I would say it's not that Christianity is bad. I would say that it is people that are bad. I mean, and it's not related to religion. I mean, you hear myths out there such as, most wars are caused by religion, which I address in the book. And that's actually a fairly silly claim. If you look at the majority of wars down through history, there have actually been fairly few religious wars. There's been some, but they've been the minority of all. The problem isn't religion. The problem is people. And you see this, for example, the groups and the governments that have been anti-religious, like communism is very anti-religious. You see their governments have killed far more people. The religions of secularism, if you want to count, people like to look at all the bad that religion's done and compare that. Well, they don't see any bad for secularism because they don't consider communism or the Stalins or the Maos, the greatest mass murderers in history, the Hitlers. They don't see them as secular. They see them as other, but not them. Well, and then they're very, very easily put all the evils on Christianity. Well, that doesn't correspond to history. History is far more complex. And Have Christians done bad things? Yes. You have the Crusades, you have the Inquisition, you have lots of bad things. But when you put it on the scales, they've also done a tremendous amount of good. Our whole concept of human rights and the dignity of the individual comes from Judeo-Christian heritage that we have. And people look at Western civilization as a model for human rights and the good things that we have developed. Well, that came out of a Christian worldview. Science came out of a Christian worldview. A lot of scientists and secularists don't like to admit it, but the early scientists, the people like Kepler and others, they were actually seeking to understand the world that had been created by God. And there's a reason that science developed in the Judeo-Christian heritage. So yes, there is a lot of bad and there's a lot of good. I happen to think that overall, how much do we have? For example, one of the largest airlines in the world is a missionary airline flying regular flights to areas that nobody else reaches. Then they are constantly being used by world organizations like the UN and stuff to get help and aid into areas that otherwise would not have it. Well, why is it there? It's there because of Christians. Where we have hospitals that are created by Christians. You have lots of good done every day. I've been in churches where they do missionary journeys to areas in the world that people need help. So yeah, we have a lot of good, and yes, there has definitely been some bad. And if you only look at one side, well, then you're going to come up to the conclusion by that side. But if you look at both, I think the answer is that Christianity has done far more good than it has done harm. Unfortunately, Christianity is made up of Christians, and Christians are people, and people don't always do things the way they should.
So let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk a little bit about the writing process. Obviously, there's a lot of research and a lot of time that went into this book. What do you think that the hardest part in writing or revising this book has been?
Probably writing and revising it. I mean, writing is a profession, and it takes a lot of work. The part I like the most is I like the research. It's one of the reasons I like apologetics, because if someone gives me a question, it's so much easier to research that particular question. And apologetics gets a bad rap because you've got this foregone conclusion. Well, no. If I only went by foregone conclusions, then I would still be an atheist. The fact that I looked at the evidence and reached a conclusion, and even since becoming a Christian, I've changed my mind on a lot of different issues as the evidence has come in. And I'm an engineer at heart, so I tend to look at data and process data and make decisions based on that data. And I like that process. I like digging in and researching. And when I do, quite frankly, oftentimes I find the evidence is even stronger than I thought it was. Occasionally I find out I was wrong, and when I do, I change my view. But I'm very evidence-based, and that's the part I like. The actual writing part, over the years, I've gotten to where I like that, because for me, writing is a way of thinking. As you can think you know something, but until you actually try to explain it to somebody else, either verbally or through writing, you don't really know it. And there's been lots of times I thought, okay, I know this. I'm going to sit down and just whip something out real quick. And then suddenly as I'm typing, I start having, well, what about questions? And next thing you know, I'm off into a whole bunch of research to see if what I actually thought was true, or did where did I get that quote? We have lots of what I call mental furniture in our heads that we don't always keep track of how we got it. And so we make decisions based on the information that we have in our head, but it's not always correct. So when I do research and I have to go look up a footnote, or where did I actually get that? I'm crazy enough to say that's interesting.
So, Elgin, I look at your books and you do have a lot of examples and historical information. And this book particularly seemed to have a lot of information from some what I would consider obscure historical sources. Is it hard for you to find some of this evidence when you're trying to put it together, or is it just really out there and I just haven't looked at it?
Well, one of the things too, I'm a little bit older, and one of the things that I do, both my wife and I do, is we read books together, and currently we're reading between 20 and 30 books a year. We used to read 30 to 40 books a year. And when you do that for several decades, you actually end up reading a lot of books. And our reading is varied. We read a lot of history, and so we come across these things. We're a book club. We've recently read things like Dante's Inferno and Marcus Aurelius Meditations, and we read. There's I don't know if you can see it, but behind me there's a Will and Ariel Durant's Story of Civilization, which is a 15-volume history of the world. Each volume is roughly 1,000 pages long, and we read all 15 volumes. Part of it is, these are things I'm actively engaged in, and so I tend to know. And then that's where the research comes in, because once I get a question or someone says, "Well, what about this?" and I start researching it, I know enough to be able to know where to go to get the answers that I need to find, and that helps a lot. It really, that's the basis. What I write is what I've read in many respects, and so the reason I'm able to do that is because I read so much. Which any aspiring writers out there, I have two main pieces of advice for them. Number one, write. You got to sit down, you got to write. It doesn't really make much difference what you write. You got to write and write, and then when you think you've done, then go back and write some more. Number two, read a lot, because you get all kinds of ideas. When I was young, I'd see these stories and I go to the movies or stuff, and it's like, wow, these are great stories. Later on in my life, I started, as I'm reading some of these books, I started coming across all these stories where all these writers got them from. I was amazed when I read Herodotus' history, the first history ever written. It was about the Persian Wars with the Greeks, and there are so many stories that in histories that ended up coming into films and movies that I saw. And I go, oh, that's where they got that story. So number one rule for writers is write, and write a lot. And the second rule is read, and read a lot.
Yeah. So speaking of advice, what would you do? So if you had a time machine and you were able to go back in time and talk to yourself before you started writing this book, is there something that you would tell yourself to make sure you do or do differently, or, what advice would you have given to yourself?
Well, write a lot and read a lot. You do anything for several decades, you will get better at it. And so one of the things that, probably the most difficult thing, updating this current version is I've become a better writer. And so, I've noticed that I've become a better writer. And so there's a few places in the older editions where I read it this time, I kind of cringed and then immediately rewrote it. So one of the nice things is when you write books like this, there's always this, what if something's going to come out that will repudiate what I just wrote? Because I can research the past, I can't research the future. And one of the nice things that, as I've revised my books, is there's very, very little, if anything, that I've actually had to go back and say, oh, well, I guess I was wrong there. If anything, all the newer information that's come out has only supported me even more. And this is, like I said, I don't just read books that I agree with. I read critics. I read things that I know I'm not going to agree with, simply to see what the ideas are and to understand what people are saying and understand what the critiques are. And that's where a lot of the information in my book comes. It comes not just from books that agree with me, it comes from books that disagree with me. So, for example, in this book, I talk about the resurrection of Jesus Christ and what is the historical evidence for the resurrection. And I do that by looking at not only modern critics, but I also look at the ancient critics. What did the ancient critics, the people who lived very close to the time of Jesus and did not believe in Jesus, who believed it was, I think one of the writers, maybe it was Tacitus, who called it an abominable evil, right? What did they say? What arguments did they put forward to refute this? And then I look at the modern one, what are the modern theories on, well, if the resurrection did occur, what did happen? And I read those, and it's interesting because sometimes these things come and go over history. And so at one point, one particular argument, like a while back, it was really popular to think, maybe Jesus didn't die on the cross. Maybe it was this Passover plot where it was all, okay, that's gone away. One of the theories is beginning to gain ground again. I don't think it gained too much ground. Was the twin theory that maybe Jesus had a twin. These things come and go and come and go. And so, some of that has changed. What's the particular criticism of the day, that tends to change. But overall, it doesn't change. The history has gotten much better for Christians. When secularism came out or came into vogue in the early 19th century and into the 20th century, that was a hard time for Christianity because they didn't have a lot of the evidence. Well, the evidence that we have gotten since then has now, things have shifted back, and trends in society tend to change. You have the, secularism currently seems to be on the decline. One of the things I have in the book is I have how, Bible sales are been up since about 2020 every year, and each year is higher than the previous year. There seems to be, whether it is or not, you always kind of hate to predict revivals because you never know if this wave will continue. But at the moment, there's increased attendance of church. I have documentation in the book about how millennials are going to church more than they used to. And, these things are changing constantly. And one of the myths you can get into is like, oh, this is the way it is, and we've settled all the issues, and everything's going to be fine for the rest of time. And no, everything is going to change. There'll be ups and downs. There'll be times of revival and times of when, people are moving away from the faith. You see that all throughout the Bible, and you see it in modern culture, and you see it in history going back. You had the Great Revival or the Great Awakening, and then you had the Second Great Awakening. These things come and go. And the thing is the actual evidence for Christianity, it's not always the same, actually, but if anything, it's getting stronger and stronger and stronger.
So, last question. What is the number one takeaway that you hope that people or your readers will get from this book?
Well, then one takeaway that I think is kind of the whole theme of the Consider Christianity series, which is Christianity is a rational and relevant religion even in the 21st century. There's this idea that Christianity is just this thing of the past. Nobody takes it seriously. I mean, can you really believe in the Bible today? No one would do that, except people do. And they do with good reason. Because when you look at, if you look at just the criticisms, it's pretty easy to reject anything. But if you look at both sides of the question, you look at the evidence for and the evidence against, and you put them together, Christianity is a relevant and reasonable choice even in the 21st century, which is, I think, why you see a lot of people, after 200 years of secularism and the dead ends that it leads into, people are looking for something else. They're looking for something better. They're looking for something more stable, and they are turning to Christianity for a good reason.
Well, thank you. And to you adventurers out there, don't forget to pick up your copy of Christianity and Secularism, Volume 2 of Elgin Hushbeck's Consider Christianity series. It's available on Amazon, Audible, and local bookstores. And let us know what you think down in the comments. Do you agree? Do you disagree? What is your take on Christianity and secularism? Thank you for watching Into the Desert, exploring the wilderness of ideas. If you made it this far in the video, don't forget to watch one of our other videos and consider sponsoring us on Patreon. And to our fellow adventurers, thank you very much for supporting this channel.